We've been answering the question, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? What is a human being? And we saw in our very first time in the Scriptures, in Genesis 1, (26 through 31), all these wonderful aspects of what it means to be made by God in His image. And we saw that very first day that one of the aspects of being made in the image of God is to be made male and female. God made human beings to reflect His image. He makes them in His image so that we would be a display of who He is. And that work isn't complete until we are equally human but distinct in being men and women. Very intentional in creation. It's so important that we start here. We live in a society where often gender is said to be a sociological imposition on us. And we should have the right to define our gender for ourselves. And that doesn't come from anything but biology, which, by the way, can be fixed pretty easily with surgery and some hormone treatments. So what does it mean to be made in God's image, but made very distinctly and intentionally male and female? Well, we need to see that this is the result of creation. This is not the result of mere biology or psychology or sociology. This is a profoundly theological truth that's grounded in creation, that male and female is the result of a divine Creator who's wise and good with an intention in creation that He be glorified. And a key element in this is being made male and female. Until this was the reality of humanity, God did not say it's very good and just what I want and I can take a Sabbath because there's nothing to add to it. And so it had to be this way for it to be everything God wanted it to be. And so we need to start there and realize that creation, this doctrine of creation, is what leads to this reality of being male and female, made in His image for His glory. So, first thing I want us to do is step back and say, this is a massive issue. It's massively important because it's not just about how we do things or who does what. This is about creation. This is about the intention of creation. This is about God getting the glory He wants from humanity made in His image. And so we back up when we start, okay, this isn't just a real practical issue. This is a profoundly theological issue. That male and female is intended by God in creation. And this is something that He delights in. He loves this, and we should too. We should love being men and women to the glory of God. We should rejoice that He's made us distinct in this way and unified at the same time. So this is a character of God issue. This is a glory of God issue. This is a doctrine of humanity issue. If you're going to get God right, you need to understand the humanity He makes that's intended to reflect His image. So it's a God issue. It's a character of God issue. We find out something of what God is like in humanity made in His image, and we find something of what we're like key in this. And then it's a gospel issue. When you read the passages that talk about man and woman, very often, if you back up, you will see that they are passages about the advancement of the gospel. So, Ephesians 5, for instance. You know, wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Why? So you'll have ordered families and homes. No. Why? So that something of the mystery of Christ and His church will be displayed to the world for the sake of the gospel. If you back up and look at the passages that talk about gender, it's not just practical details of home life. It's gospel stuff. It's showing the world something of who God is and what the gospel is in the way men and women relate. And so I want us to realize how wonderful this stuff is. And sadly, it becomes burdensome to us in figuring out the details of what it's supposed to look like. But we need to step back and say, wait, this is wonderful. God has created us, man and woman, to His glory, for His glory. And that's a thrilling thing to think about. And especially in a culture that is either overly stereotyping what genders are supposed to look like, or obliterating the distinctions at all, saying they're mere sociology imposed on us. It's important for us to say, oh, God made us this way. We don't need to become something we're not already when He made us. We simply need to express who He made us to be in relationship with each other. So, go to Romans 1. It's fascinating to me the way the gender question plays in to the glory of God issue here. Romans 1:18, Paul, you remember, starts right out of the gate talking about human depravity and our desperate need for reconciliation. And in 1:18, he picks his argument up, talking about the wrath of God. Romans 1:18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. Humanity centrally. So that they're without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God, nor give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, and birds and animals and reptiles. So, we've got this great exchange that happens. Fundamental to the human problem is this exchange of God's glory for mine. We've talked about the purpose of humanity being to glorify God, to ascribe glory to Him, to put the focus and honor toward Him, and instead of that, in our sin, we reverse that. We say, we will be glorified, you will be diminished. So Paul is making this statement about what sin is, and it's profoundly theological. It's so important we're making theological connections constantly in how we define things. So sin is a theological problem. It's a relational problem. It's a glory issue. Who's getting the glory from our lives? God in all His glory, or ourselves? And he's saying what's happened is this exchange. God's glory for mine. And so what's God's response to this? It's judgment in letting that run its course. What? So what's God do in response to this exchange of His glory for ours? Therefore, God gave them up to the lusts of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. And he gets worshipful here. Amen. And so Paul is laying it out. He's saying, okay, in response to human rebellion and self-glorification at the expense of God's glory, God lets that run its course, bringing about even the curse to intensify the difficulty of life in this world, to force us beyond this world to Him and wake ourselves up to our horrible rebellion against the King. And then watch this. Paul says, I need to give an example of how this is so clearly displayed. How this exchange of God's glory for ours is explained. And watch what he does. He goes to gender denial. Gender distinction obliteration. Watch what happens. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchange natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women who were consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. Do you find that interesting that Paul chooses homosexuality as this key illustration of this sinful self-glorification at the expense of God's glory? I just find that fascinating. Actually, I took New Testament as literature at my state university, and And I was the only Christian that I know in the class, and it was just amazing to take this class. And when we studied Romans, we had our guest lecturer, who was the president of the university, who had some training in religious studies, and he came in, and we started studying Romans, and I raised my hand, because I honestly didn't know. And I said, why do you think in the middle of this treatment of sin and God's glory and His wrath and human sin, that Paul brings up homosexuality? It was really awkward in the room right there. And I remember the president of the university, this big state university, just fumbled around, just really stymied and unsure of where to go. Well, I didn't know then, but I know now what's going on here. There's a denial of the Creator when you deny what He's intentionally created for His glory. You're saying, no, I'm not going to live the way you've created me to live. I will determine how I express my sexuality as a man or a woman. And so what happens is it becomes unnatural. Now, we need to define natural here, because in one sense, it's very natural for me to be impatient and angry. I've had an anger problem my whole life. It's gotten way better, and I'm impatient. It's very natural in one sense for me to be that way. But it's anything but natural from God's perspective, not what He intends in creation when He makes us. And so natural here means according to creation, according to how God made us, that's the intention here. And when you defy this intention in the sexual expression of homosexuality here, as the illustration Paul uses, he's saying it encapsulates sinfulness. It encapsulates the problem with humanity. It pictures this for us. It obliterates the gender distinctions God intends for us to have in creation, by which we glorify Him, and it typifies the sort of self-exaltation as opposed to God exaltation. Well, and if you think about it, homosexuality is this ability I have to express my sexuality and to experience pleasure and loving someone sexually who's as much like me as I can possibly find. Isn't that interesting? That it's just too much of a reach for me to have this sort of intimacy and love expression and relationship with someone so different than me of another gender. And so I will find a way to exalt myself by actually having sex with someone who's as much like me as I can find. That there's intentional distinction here that God wants to see glorify Him. And part of the glory comes from that distinction somehow becoming one flesh in the midst of the distinction. So I just find it fascinating that this is where Paul goes, that to the obliteration of intended gender distinctions in the homosexual expression that he points out that was certainly alive and well in Rome.